Back in 1974, Mike Austin drove a golf ball 515 yards in the National Senior Open just outside of Las Vegas. And he used a very specific hand action or wrist and forearm action that he had been using his entire life. The idea or the conception of his hand action or his release has gotten muddied and convoluted, and it's made a lot of people get lost or get confused on what they should be doing with their hands at the bottom of the swing through the ball. So right after this, let's take a deep dive into the various styles that have been put forth that are supposed to be Mike Austin's, and which one I think you should be doing, clear up some confusion. Hey, this is Steve from HitItLonger.com. Before we talk about hand action, let me briefly mention the HitItLonger.com premium membership. For $15 a month or less, if you buy for more than a month, you get a ton of great features. You get over 60 lessons that will help you step by step build the Mike Austin golf swing. Some of it you can even do at home, just in case you're stuck at home or at the office too often. You also get my speed training regimen. You get email support from me and my tech team. And maybe the best feature is you get 50% off all video swing analysis, where you can send me your video and I'll send you back a kind of Madden football style analysis of it, where I can draw on the screen and I can talk to you at the same time. So I've left a link down below to sign up for that. I hope you'll take advantage. Okay, let's get right into some of the do's and don'ts of the hand action through impact. So the Mike Austin camp of disciples, you could say, has kind of been cut down the middle into two. You could even call the two camps, say, the classic release and the modern release. Now, the modern release is quite different, and it was mostly presented by a gentleman by the name of Dan Schauger. A lot of you have probably heard of him. Some of you may even have been to his boot camps and tried his method. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that in this video, and also about the way Mike was doing things when he hit his 515-yard drive. So throughout Mike Austin's career, and you can see the evidence of this on his KHJ Channel 9 TV show from 1960.
When you move your weight forward like this, I take my left thumb and try to force it against the shaft, and also the upper part of my right thumb against the left, which causes the shaft to catch up with the left arm. But there's one motion that you've got to do in conjunction with this. While you make this motion, it's like you have a knife and you got the edge pointing right at this ball. You come down with the edge. Before you get there, you turn the broadside of this knife into the back of that ball, which is done by actually controlling these two bones in the forearm by the pronatus and the supinatus muscles. In other words, not only do we have to control the plane that we are working on, but also the blade. This blade actually stays square to the points of the compass through which it moves. If I stood here like this, say this is the North Pole and this is the South Pole, if I rotate it to the East Pole, my hand is facing back here, so it isn't anything like it was when I started. It's 90 degrees removed.
Mike, do you attempt to delay the uncocking of the wrists and the hands on the downswing?
I certainly do not. This is where I get the jump on almost anyone when I try to hit the ball. When I move my weight over here and my shoulders rotate in this manner, I give the club a throw so it will catch up. Your stimulus begins right here. Everything works as a unit, with the hands trying to work faster than the arms so they can take up the slack that's in the bend of the wrist, what we call the cock of the hand.
Do your hands cross over on impact?
They don't cross over at impact, they cross over after impact. They're square. They're right in line. Palm of the left hand on the front of the shaft, palm of the right hand on the back of the shaft. Face square to the intended line of flight.
How important?
After the...
Oh, excuse me.
And after the crossover, after the hit, the right hand crosses over the left hand, then the elbows fold and dump it over your back.
You can also see it from Golf is Mental Imagery, Volume 1.
Turn that to the part which it departed from. It's putting back what I took out. Kick the ball out of the way. Left elbow continues to roll. Right elbow straightening out. Left hand going into top extension. Right hand now going into radial flexion. I'm now to a point where the shaft is horizontal to the ground, parallel to the intended line of flight. This is the exercise. 1, 2, 1, 2. Like a differential working in here. You're swinging now the pendulum. This action right here really creates power in the golf swing. Practice that a great deal.
Which was in the mid-80s roughly, that Mike was using and advocating a motion with the wrists. He would talk about it as a 180-degree semicircle this way. So he is starting square, talks about turning the forearm and wrist 90 degrees, and then cocking the wrist to here. And then we're going to put back what we borrowed, and then continue by crossing over the forearms, and again cocking the wrist back up again. Let me show you from the down the line angle. Same thing. Turn the forearm and cock the wrist, puts it here. If you isolate it, return it back, cross it over, and rehinge it again, just like that. So in that manner, the club head does pass around a 180-degree semicircle just because of the active actions at the wrist. Now, I worked with Mike in person in the early 90s, and at that point he was still advocating solely this method of snapping and rolling the wrist freely. Now, what you've got to understand in here, it's not just this turning action alone. Also embedded into that is you have this flapping action, or the dorsiflexion, palmar flexion of both wrists this way. So you have those actions are kind of tied up together in each other. And so isolating one and not putting the other in can kind of get people off course if they think you're just only rolling the forearm through impact. Now, when Dan Schauger came along and started working with Mike, you know, it's hard to tell if Mike came up with this, or it was much later on that Mike may have thought about the idea of doing it the opposite way. Dan admitted to me in person that he had invented it himself. But the method worked like this, where instead of rolling the forearm this way, see what Dan would say anytime you took a lesson from him, the first thing he would say to you after you'd hit one golf ball is, he would say, well, your problem is that you're rolling your forearms the wrong way. You have to roll them the opposite way. So, I'll show you from this angle. Rather than letting the forearm roll in the takeaway or the backswing in a clockwise way, he'd have you turn it an hour and counterclockwise. In other words, he'd have you supinate the left forearm, and then the only motion left you can make is to palmar flex the left wrist this way. So the right wrist ends up in a fairly similar position as it normally does, but the left wrist is significantly different. That looks like this. You can see how the club head is much more closed and pointed down to the ground than it normally would be. And because of that, the idea is to simply flap through, and you'd hit the ball straight every single time. Because if the forearms aren't rolling and the club face isn't rolling, then the club face should be staying square to the arc. Well, let me perform a couple of those for you in a chip fashion. Now, my feeling about that forearm and wrist technique that Dan taught and presented is probably do you okay out to about 100 yards or so. After that, I think you're going to start to struggle more and more and more as you try to hit the ball farther and farther. I've never seen anyone in person who's used this method to play any kind of good golf. I've never seen anyone in person ever use Dan's technique to hit the ball far. To me, you could chip and pitch this way, but other than that, I can't see it. So a lot of people have left comments on the channel about whether or not we should be rolling the forearm, the right forearm over the left, which is a hallmark when Austin and Dunaway show you the release action. Again, when you pull that action out and you isolate it, it can really leave people confused because it's not the only action going on in the swing as far as your hands going through the ball. In Dan's swing, you're going to roll the forearms after impact anyway. Let me show you why that is. So let's assume that we go reverse, palm or flex, and we take it all the way up to the top. So this is where Dan wanted us to be here, just like that. Now coming down, we can just flap it because we don't have to square it anyhow, this way. But now we're here, what are we going to do after here? Well, if you're not going to allow the right forearm to go over the top of the left, it would look something like this. The left elbow will start to chicken wing, and the club will necessarily decelerate too soon and too quickly because you're not able to accelerate it around the circle. The hand action is acting as a brake at that point. Once you have flapped here, you either have to cross the forearm over this way in order to keep the club moving on its momentum, on its own arc of momentum. Let me show you from this angle. Reverse roll the forearms, palm or flex, all the way to the top, just like that. Now I can just flap it through to here, but now what am I going to do after this? If I don't let the forearm cross over, the left elbow has to chicken wing. The club head is snatched off of its plane, its arc, and we have a great deceleration of the club head. So either method, the club head is still trying to swing relatively on a circular motion. In order to keep it accelerating and keep swinging on that motion without disrupting that, we must still, even in Dan's method, we must roll the forearm over. That would look something like this. Reverse roll, palm or flex, flap, flap through, cross over. Let me show you from this angle now. Reverse turn, palm or flex, up to the top, pivoting, flapping the wrists. Now what are we going to do? We have to go over to continue the club throwing over our shoulder into the correct finish. So whether or not you use classic or modern, certainly the roll of the forearm is going to be present after impact to keep the club going. So the problem that is presented with the Austin's classical hand action is that it would be harder to keep the club face square to square, but this simply isn't true. See, we now know we're not just talking about active squaring forces of the hands actually, the muscles actually firing to make the club do this. You see, we have other forces that are present, passive forces that are present in the, call the swing a system, on the way down into the ball. So one passive force that you have, the big one that I talk about all the time on this channel, is the handle path coming around left and upwards this way. And you can see I can use this kind of as a counter lever. As the club works left around my body, the club head is going to be thrown around, similar to a water skier. As the boat turns left, he gets whipped around the boat. And he can actually pass the boat and circle the boat if the boat continues to turn. Another passive reaction you have in the swing is if you have the club coming down, if you have it on the correct shallow plane this way, as opposed to this way. If you have it this way, we have passive force to recover, rebound off of this, snap and roll the forearms over, just like that. So you have these two passive forces that are supplying absolutely plenty of squaring force. In fact, in a good swing, I don't feel like my wrists are turning it over at all through the ball. Just like the Schauger hand action, if I have everything go right, I feel like I'm simply flapping square. That would be just this motion here. And I absolutely feel like I'm doing that through the impact zone, despite not using the reverse roll action that Dan Schauger advocated on the backswing. So to me, if you're swinging correctly, there's plenty of squaring forces acting on the club that you don't really need to actively roll the forearms coming into the ball. Although it happens, it's not happening from necessarily an active force. It's kind of happening automatically or passively. So I feel like on a good shot, I am flapping square to square and then rolling into the follow through. So it's something you can work on. It's flapping, then rolling. Let me hit a couple for you. You can watch them from different angles. See if you can pick up on flapping and rolling. Take a divot. Okay, so if I was going to try to succinctly describe the hand action that Mike Austin was doing, again, it would be a flap and roll. So through the impact zone, I'm coming from this position, and I am, as my body moves left and my hands move left, I'm simply flapping, or I'm doing this motion here. If I'm swinging correctly, I've got enough squaring force going on that's going to help me square the toe of the club and make the ball go straight and not slice with an open face. And then after the flap is over, my right forearm is going to roll over the left, the folding left, in order to keep the club head orbiting on the same plane all the way through the finish. So it would be flap and roll, just like that. So between the hand action, where the message has really gotten convoluted over the years, and the 4 to 10 pivot concept that Mike Dunaway describes in some of his videos, these are the two main reasons why Mike Austin disciples or Mike Austin students have simply not flourished over the last decade. If you really want your golf game to get going this year, hit the ball long and straight, I really advocate that you use the classic hand action that Mike used for decades and decades, and used it to hit a ball 515 yards. Professed it for 50 years, and why you'd want a tiny bit of evidence at the end that he might have changed a little bit, that's not how he did it. He was paralyzed, he was near the end of his life. I'd like you to combine that classic hand action with a 4 to 8 hip style or hip action that I describe in another video on this channel. I will leave a link down below. So I hope if you're trying to learn this awesome way of swinging that is, we think, easier on the joints, more built-in power, tons of accuracy, if you're trying to learn this, keep coming back to this channel and my videos. I talk about it all the time. Thanks a lot for watching. Thanks to Golf Development Complex. Please subscribe, like, leave a comment down below, and either I'll see you in the next video or I'll see you longer and straighter down the fairway. Stay well.